Hello everybody. So today I'll be talking about energy systems. Now before I begin, I like to make concepts very simple, and so I'll explain this mentioning a small example. Now consider you're hungry and you enter into the kitchen. So you have to light the gas stove. So you take a lighter in your hand or a matchstick, and then you switch on the gas stove and then you light it. So soon you will observe there is fire, and then you will place your vessel on top of that fire on the gas stove. Now here, gas that is used to make fire and where you get heat in turn to prepare your meal is nothing but fuel. So you light the gas stove which has gas, which gives gas, which is nothing but fuel. And you need this fuel because it produces fire, and here you light it with the help of a matchstick or a lighter. So this fire in turn, it produces heat, which you use this heat for cooking your meal. So this heat is nothing but a form of energy. It is energy. So you use fuel because it gives energy, and it produces fire where you can use it to prepare your meal. So this is a very small example, a simple example for us to understand and make concepts much easier. Now in comparison, we eat food. Why do we eat food? Right from the time of our birth till we are living, we are eating food. Food is eaten because it's a fuel for our body. We eat food because food is fuel. Now this food, because it's fuel, now during the process of digestion, this food, it is broken down. Big components of food is broken down to smaller components, and that's where the body can use it and it can absorb it. So digestion is nothing but metabolism. Now there is continuously metabolism taking place in our body. Digestion is happening, breaking of big components to smaller components for the body to absorb it. Now metabolism is nothing but, it's the sum of all the chemical reactions that are taking place in our body to sustain life and to perform our daily life activities. So metabolism is nothing but a series of chemical reactions that are taking place in our body, and all of these series of chemical reactions, they can be explained to their respective metabolic pathways. we'll study this and we'll understand this in detail. Now this digestion, in turn, it produces energy. And this energy we use for many things. Like we use this energy when we are working out, when we are exercising, when you're reading a book. So physical activity is not there, you're seated on a chair and you're reading a book, but your brain is active, your brain is requiring energy. Daily life activities for growth and repair, for growth of your muscles, of your hair, of your bones, of your nails, of your tissues, all of that requires energy, and therefore we consume food. So energy in the form of ATP. So ATP is the form of energy that we use, and this is nothing but the energy currency of our body. So food, through the process of digestion, it gets broken down to smaller molecules, big molecules to smaller molecules, and that's how the body can absorb it and utilize it for energy. Now just like this example I mentioned, for the fuel to get activated, for it to be used, we used a lighter or a matchstick to light it. Now for these series of chemical reactions to take place, it requires enzymes, it requires hormones, it requires oxygen. So just to mention a few, for the metabolism to take place, it requires all of this. So that is how, in simple understanding, this is how our body gets energy from the food. Now since we have understood that we eat food because it's energy, with this simple small representation, now we'll understand it in a little detail. Now food, all the food that we eat, it consists of 3 macronutrients, which are carbohydrates, fats and proteins. Carbohydrates, fats and proteins. Now I mentioned during the process of digestion, through metabolism, big molecules are broken down to smaller molecules. So during digestion, carbohydrates are broken down to glucose. Glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. Now how does our body get energy? This is our cell. So glucose, which is a 6-carbon molecule, it enters into the cell. Now in the cell there are many organelles like ribosome, lysosome, Golgi bodies, just to mention a few for our understanding. Most important with respect to what we are studying, the mitochondria. Now all these organelles, they have their respective functions. Now coming to mitochondria, its function is to produce energy. The mitochondria in the cell is responsible for producing energy, and that's why it's known as the powerhouse of the cell. It is from here that energy is produced. It is from here that we get energy. I'll explain to you how. Now this big molecule of glucose, which has become smaller after carbohydrate, a very big molecule was broken down to a smaller molecule, glucose, a 6 carbon molecule. Now this molecule, it has entered into the cell, and like this we have thousands, millions, trillions of cells in our body. So this glucose, it enters into the cell to get energy. Now it has entered into the cell. Now this big molecule, it has to enter into the mitochondria. Now for it to enter into the mitochondria, it has to become even smaller, and that's how it can push itself through and enter into the mitochondria. So it makes itself even smaller to enter. So here it enters, it makes glucose is broken down to pyruvate, which is smaller molecule. Here it's a 6 carbon molecule. Now it becomes smaller 3 carbon molecule, and that's how pyruvate can enter into the mitochondria, and that's how energy can be produced. So glucose becomes smaller, it becomes pyruvate, which is a 3 carbon molecule. Now this is the mitochondria. So here pyruvate enters into the mitochondria. When it enters, again there is a series of chemical reactions taking place to make energy. Like I mentioned, now these chemical reactions, for them to get activated, they require enzymes and hormones. So in the presence of certain hormones and enzymes, there is a pathway that follows, which is Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle. Now this is just for a brief understanding that the Krebs cycle takes place, but here there are a series of chemical reactions taking place in this entire cycle. A lot of chemical reactions. This is just for a brief understanding. So in all these series of chemical reactions taking place, there is ATP produced, which is nothing but energy, and there is carbon dioxide and water given out. And therefore now I am taking in oxygen and my body is producing energy. I require energy to talk to you all and explain this. So I take in oxygen, my body makes energy, and I give out carbon dioxide. I am exhaling out carbon dioxide, and this is why the representation of the reaction. This is just for our brief understanding. There are a list of chemical reactions continuously taking place in our body. Now in the presence of certain enzymes and hormones, this pathway follows, the Krebs cycle pathway. In the absence of certain hormones and enzymes, another pathway follows, which is body produces ketone bodies, and this in turn gives out ATPs. Now we have understood how carbohydrate is broken down to glucose. From glucose it becomes pyruvate. Pyruvate enters, glucose enters into the cell. Then after it enters into the cell, it breaks down to pyruvate before it enters the mitochondria. Krebs cycle, through that we get ATPs. In the absence of certain enzymes and hormones, another pathway follows which makes ketone bodies. This in turn produces ATP, and this is how we get energy. Now coming to fats. Fats is in the form of triglyceride. Triglyceride is the molecule of fat. So we'll split the word for understanding. Tri means 3 and glyceride means glycerol. So this is how the structure looks. This is a triglyceride molecule. This is glycerol, and this is 3 fatty acids. Now this big molecule, like I explained, the carbohydrate, the glucose was a big molecule. It broke down, smaller molecule, it became pyruvate for the body to absorb it and use it for energy. The same thing happens here. This big molecule of triglyceride, it has to break. So it splits with presence of certain enzymes. So it splits, it becomes one molecule of glycerol and 3 fatty acids. They split. So it is glycerol and fatty acids. Now the body can use glycerol to make energy. Glycerol enters into this pathway. and this pathway is glycolysis. The breaking of glucose to make pyruvate, which takes place with a series of chemical reactions, is known as glycolysis. So glycerol enters into this pathway, it becomes pyruvate, where pyruvate again enters into the mitochondria, and then energy is produced respectively. Now glycerol to pyruvate is this pathway follows. This is known as gluconeogenesis. The making of energy, the making of glucose through non-carbohydrate sources, that is to glycerol, is known as gluconeogenesis. I have explained this concept of gluconeogenesis in my previous videos, so you can check it out and refer to that. So fatty acids, directly it enters, and here I forgot to mention that pyruvate, it gets converted to acetyl CoA, again through a series of reactions. This acetyl CoA begins the Krebs cycle. So the fatty acids, directly it gets converted to acetyl CoA through beta oxidation, which is explained through lipolysis. So lipo means fat and lysis means breakdown. So the breaking of fat, which happens through a series of chemical reactions through the beta oxidation pathway, which makes acetyl CoA, is known as lipolysis. Acetyl CoA initiates the Krebs cycle, to where we get energy. Now coming to proteins. There are two types of proteins. Proteins are broken down to amino acids like carbohydrates are broken down to glucose, proteins are broken down to amino acids. There are two kinds of amino acids, that is glucogenic amino acids and ketogenic amino acids. Now the glucogenic amino acids, it enters, it gets into, it gets and enters as pyruvate, and this is known as gluconeogenesis. So making of glucose through non-carbohydrate sources is known as gluconeogenesis. So energy, glucose, which is pyruvate, which is got through the previous metabolic pathways, is got through glucogenic amino acids. Now the ketogenic amino acids, they enter as acetyl CoA, and this is degradation. So this is how we get energy. We get energy through carbohydrates, fats and proteins. Now one most important thing is that the mitochondria can function, it can make energy only in the presence of oxygen. In the presence of oxygen, pyruvate enters and gets converted through a series of chemical reactions into acetyl-CoA, which in turn initiates the Krebs cycle. So this happens in the presence of oxygen, and this is known as aerobic respiration. Aerobic energy pathway. I am talking to you all, I am explaining this, I am breathing continuously oxygen, my body is using the fuel, it is taking in oxygen, in the presence of oxygen producing energy, which is nothing but aerobic respiration, aerobic energy pathway. Some more examples: you are going for a jog for 20 minutes, half an hour, you are going cycling, running, swimming, you are doing dancing, aerobics, then you are doing rowing in the gym, you are using the elliptical cross trainer. All these are aerobic respiration. Skipping, there are so many examples I can mention where the body uses oxygen and we get energy. Now what happens when I am doing weight training? I am taking a heavy dumbbell in my hand, I am lifting it, holding it here, I take a deep breath, inhale, hold my breath tight so that my body becomes firm and tight, and then I do the repetition. I generate a lot of force, I make my body tight and firm, and I push with all that power and force. So here I am not breathing continuously, I am holding my breath. Breathing happens continuously in this aerobic energy pathways like swimming, cycling. Continuously you are inhaling oxygen, your body is making energy. But here in the absence of oxygen, another pathway follows, and that is pyruvate gets converted to lactic acid. Lactic acid. And this lactic acid in turn makes ATPs. And that is the reason when I am doing heavy poundage in the gym, I am lifting heavy weights, very heavy weights I am talking about compared to my capacity. High intensity, I can't do it continuously for 5 minutes or 10 minutes like the way I do low intensity like walking, jogging. You get that burning effect, you feel like your muscles are tired and that little burn sensation, and that is because of the production of lactic acid which makes energy. So that happens in the absence of oxygen, which is explained through anaerobic glycolysis. So such activities like weight training, then an athlete who is doing shot put, high jump, long jump, sprinting, all of this is using anaerobic glycolysis energy pathway. So this happens in the absence of oxygen. This happens in the presence of oxygen. Aerobic respiration, anaerobic energy pathway. And therefore, when a person is doing shot put, he takes the shot put, that heavy weight in his hand, he holds it, he makes his body tight and firm, generates a lot of force, and he pushes it. So a lot of energy, a lot of force has to be created for a very short period of time, and that's where anaerobic glycolysis is taking place. Now, to sum this up, our body can use carbohydrates, fats or proteins as a source of fuel. The body prefers to use carbohydrates or fats as a source of fuel. It can use proteins as a source of fuel, but the body doesn't prefer to use it. And that's because proteins have a lot of important functions. Like we studied in our school, when we were in school, that proteins are the building blocks of our body. So proteins are responsible for building of our muscles, our tissues, our bones, skin, hair, nails. All of this is made of proteins. So proteins help in growth and repair of our body. There are a lot of other important functions also, like proteins make immunoglobulins, which in turn help in immunity. Proteins are responsible for making of enzymes and hormones in your body, and therefore the body spares it. It spares this protein for the other important functions, and it prefers to use either fats or carbohydrates as a source of fuel. Now, coming to fats, most important thing when we are referring to weight loss and fat loss, all of that, triglyceride, fats, which is dietary sources or stored body fat. So the body can utilize either dietary or stored body fat as a source of fuel. This is how it happens. This is the chemical reactions. It splits to glycerol and fatty acid. To beta oxidation you get acetyl CoA. Acetyl CoA enters Krebs cycle, energy is produced. Glycerol again enters as pyruvate and we can get energy. So this is how a person who is overweight or obese is having stored form of energy, a lot of unused energy, and that is how this stored form of energy, which is triglyceride, it can be utilized and it can break down to make energy. So this is very important when we talk about fitness. Now the conclusion is that we need to eat wholesome food with a balanced diet, because I mentioned with all of this, food is fuel for our body, and therefore eating quality food helps in getting quality fuel. So quality food will give you quality fuel. Very important. Quality fuel is very important, and this is how the body produces energy through the food.